Alright, this is Two Who's Review, the show that still doesn't have an official introduction. Still just whatever we say in the moment, I guess. I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And today we're going to be looking at the classic serial Earthshock.
Exciting stuff.
Alright, so this is the first of our classic series revisits.
Mm-hmm.
This is an episode that I've seen before, one of the few that I've already seen before rewatching it for this. Of course, you've probably seen this a bunch of times.
Yes, I have quite a few.
Okay, so as always, we're here on thetimescales.com to get the user rankings for this episode before we launch into our opinions on it. So this episode has an average rating of 8.4 out of 10 with 167 votes cast.
Mm-hmm.
That seems about right to me.
Yeah, honestly. Actually, first off, I'd just like to say I'm so glad you found that website, because I had a feeling that while doing this I would frequently just say, "Oh, well, the general consensus is, oh, most people think," but I wouldn't be able to actually cite anything. And at least this is something to sort of latch onto as a source. So that's cool.
It is
Um,
good to have that kind of like, we have the evidence to back it up as opposed to just saying whatever we want to say.
yeah.
I've just realized that I meant to do the synopsis read at the start
Oh,
of this,
fuck.
so I'll just do
Yeah.
that. I'll just do that now, real quick.
Yeah. No worries. Go ahead.
The TARDIS arrives on Earth in the 26th century in a cave system containing numerous dinosaur fossils. The Doctor's party comes under suspicion from a military force led by Lieutenant Scott, who are investigating the disappearance of a group of paleontologists and geologists. They are all then attacked by androids, the true culprits, under the control of the Cybermen. The Doctor manages to deactivate a bomb intended by the Cybermen to destroy an imminent peace conference. He then follows the bomb's activating signal to an approaching space freighter commanded by Captain Briggs, on board which it transpires that an army of Cybermen are concealed. An attempt by Adric to thwart the Cybermen's plans result in the freighter being inadvertently sent millions of years into the past, where it explodes and causes the extinction of the dinosaurs and also the death of Adric. The Doctor destroys the Cyber Leader by forcing into its chest unit some gold fragments from a badge previously worn by Adric. But yeah, it's got an 8.4 out of 10 overall. Like I said, I think that's about right. I really enjoy this episode. I think I actually enjoyed it better or more on this rewatch than I did the first time round. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's maybe because by this point I've kind of accepted the format of Classic Who, and that it is
Yeah.
going to be different from the revived series, and I think
Yeah.
having that acceptance about what it isn't more so than what it is, I was able to just enjoy it. And yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think we'll get into more of
Absolutely.
that. We'll get into more of the specifics of that a bit later on in the episode. But 8.4. Where does that? Where do you think that stands for you?
Yeah, I would say so. I was, maybe I might give it a little higher, maybe closer to a 9. But I rewatched it the other day, which is a habit I'm glad to get into, by the way, because it just keeps it fresh in my mind. Um, and I watched it, and it wasn't as, I don't know, perhaps not as like pitch perfect as it was in my nostalgia brain, because I watched it when I was quite young. I have surprisingly vivid memories of watching it. Unfortunately, I was sick in hospital at the time. That was quite strange. But anyway, so it wasn't as pitch perfect as perhaps I remembered back then, but it's still pretty good. It holds up quite well, and it gets better as the episodes go on, which is what you want. It doesn't get weaker at all at the end. The climax is really really delivers those emotional gut punches, in particular with Adric's death. Excuse me. And I remember, even when I first saw it, um, because I'd watched a fair bit of classic Doctor Who up to that point, and I was aware that for a show that's marketed towards kids a lot of the time, it does get pretty dark at times, even in the classic series. But even I was pretty uh, shocked when Adric died. It was yeah, that surprised me, and especially with that great ending where it's just a close up of his little star badge with no music over the ending titles. I thought was a really quite powerful, and I'm glad that they felt they could take a risk like that um, in the show. So I think overall, those dramatic punches, they do hit quite hard. And even though, I don't know, maybe we'll get into it, but there might be some small elements with the plot that aren't, again, super perfect, but it's still pretty good for me. And I think an 8.4, yeah, certainly a very fair judgment.
This is actually this is a good lead into like the sub rankings that Timescales likes to do.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
it's got an 8.5 for plot.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like it's a simple enough story to follow, but it has its mysteries. It doesn't have too many major plot holes as far as I can remember. Nothing that breaks the story in any case. There are one or two contrivances, but
yeah, I can think of one, maybe slight one, but it's only something I've realized from watching it again as an adult. But it doesn't bother me too much. It doesn't take away from the ending. We'll get into that anyway.
Yeah. For acting, it's got an 8.7. I think that's also fair.
Yeah, especially for the other smaller actors, because a lot of the time, in Doctor Who, you do get those melodramatic, sort of Shakespearean, hammy performances, especially with a lot of the deaths. But the actors in this one. The side characters work quite well, in my view. So,
yeah, I agree with that as well. It's got an 8.4 for effects.
Yeah. I mean, it looks dated by modern standards. There was actually a version on, because I've got a Blu-ray copy of it, and you can update the special effects. But I thought, no, just watch it with the classic effects, so I'm not having my perception of it skewed in any way. And yeah, it shows, but it still works in the context of Doctor Who, and it's one of those things where it's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to the classics, is like I just love those really zany, wacky sound effects with the lasers going off, and it's great.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like these kinds of effects I can I can oddly stomach a bit more than like the early 2005 stuff where they really they really rely a lot on like it's a lot of media from the late 2000s and early 2010s relied a lot on CGI at a point where CGI wasn't quite good enough yet.
Well, certainly not for television.
Even some films, like a lot of live action films from that era rely, because at the time CGI was the hot new thing. So everyone's like, yeah, we got to use it. It's a lot cheaper than doing everything practically. But that hadn't quite worked out. No, you need to do a mix of both. So when they go whole hog on the CGI, it doesn't, and especially because like those kinds of effects have dated very quickly, it doesn't quite hold up. But the stuff like this from the 80s, I tend to be a lot more on board with. I will always find it funny whenever like the actors inside the Cybermen suits kind of stumble, and they just leave those in the edit. That's always kind of funny to me. But
I've always loved, and I knew this because I'd watched, I think it was the making of documentary that came with the original DVD, but near the end, like right at the end where, the bit where the cyber leader dies, you can see his microphone box is slipped into the front part of his mask, and it doesn't bother me because it just, I don't know, like I notice it, but knowing the background of it, it just makes me laugh, and I kind of love it.
That's interesting because I was always of the impression that, especially rewatching it, I always thought that they dubbed the cyber leader's voice on afterwards. I didn't think that it was a live recording from on set.
Oh no, it would have been dubbed over. I'm going from memory. I think it was like a voice box, but it might have been because I think I could easily be getting this wrong, but it might have been they recorded like his voice while he was speaking, but then they brought it back and dubbed it over.
That makes more sense, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, some component just fell, and you can clearly see it.
I must have missed it.
I love it. Only the best of the BBC. I love it.
It's got an 8.6 for replay value, which I think I'm living proof for that. It got better on a second watch.
Yeah.
And 10 out of 76 raters say this story requires a previous story for optimal viewing. don't agree with that completely, but I do kind of see where they're coming from. I think
Yeah,
that
I'm the same.
if you have seen some previous stories, I think the Dr. Adric connection is probably a bit more fleshed out if you have seen the build up
for
to
sure.
the moment, especially since episode 1 starts with them at odds. I think if you've seen the episodes beforehand, you might you might be able to tell. You have a clear image of who's right about their dynamic. If Adric is correct in the sense of no, the Doctor I'm clearly number 3 out of 3 in your eyes for the companions here. Or if the Doctor is right, where it's like, no, I do take time for you.
Yeah.
I imagine it's a mix of both, but I can't comment on that. This is the only Adric story I've seen.
Yeah. That's a very fair call. I think you've made, because they're even tiny little details like the bit where the Doctor hands Adric the book. Black Orchid. It's fascinating. That is a reference to. I'm pretty sure it was the previous episode, Black Orchid, which I think they go to. It's been ages since I've seen it. I want to say they go to like some Renaissance setting. Anyway, so there's that, but there's even another line where Adric says that's like the same thing you said to Tegan, and the Doctor says that's not fair. Now, you would not know what that exchange is about unless you'd seen an episode that addressed what that was. So yes, it's not a perfect standalone Classic Who episode in the sense that there are bits of continuity that you would probably need to know about to really sort of be able to figure out what all of those character dynamics are about. Having said that, I actually think they take care of the character dynamics, especially between the Doctor and Adric, pretty well.
No, I definitely agree with that. Like I said, it is my only Adric story I've seen, but like you do get a very clear image of who the characters are, what their dynamic is. You do get a sense very early that Adric at the very least feels like he could be doing more, it's interesting. Like I've always thought it's a good idea to have multiple companions on the TARDIS, just so you can have those different Doctor companion relationships explored a bit more. Yeah, exactly. Like just it's interesting seeing the Doctor like treat different companions differently when they're on the same TARDIS. I think that's an interesting thing to explore. Something that the Revive series doesn't really ever do until we get Amy and Rory.
Yeah, because it's mainly just Doctor companion.
For the most part, yeah. Okay, but let's get into a bit more of a detailed breakdown from here. Now that we've gone over the timescales rankings, we've covered that pretty thoroughly at this point.
Mm-hmm.
This is the story where on my first watch I was kind of like, this shows a lot of the cracks in Classic Who for me. At the time anyway, I thought, I don't quite agree with this now, but I was like, okay, for watching episode 1, I was like, okay, well, nothing's happening. Like, let's get on with it. Like, the Doctor and the companions are just having a bunch of dinosaur talks, which don't really seem related at any point. And for a lot of the first episode of my first watch, it did feel a lot like, okay, let's just get to the Cybermen. Let's just get to the action. But I think watching it back, I think I forgot since first watching it how much of the first episode is focused on the military and the paleontology side of things. Like it's setting up the mystery of who is behind all this, so that it can have the Cybermen cliffhanger at the end.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is obviously setting up the finale, where it's like, okay, no, we had our big focus on dinosaurs for a reason. It's so that we can have the ending happen, basically. But I think a lot of the first episode is also endearing us to the side characters, a lot of whom I really ended up enjoying. Like Lieutenant Scott at the start, he's the classic, I'm in charge, I don't trust the Doctor, that kind of thing. But like, it's really great seeing characters like that very quickly turn and be like, okay, no, I trust you. What do we need to do?
Yeah, so I think the setup that episode, the first episode, undergoes is quite good. I really do think it's effective, and even as a younger kid where I didn't have as much of an understanding of how stories worked and setup and stuff like that. Even then, I still quite liked the first episode because the interactions between the characters are really quite good. There's quite a bit of emotional heft. I mean, I was, as a kid, like a lot of kids, I guess, I was really into dinosaurs at the time, so it's like, oh, they're talking about dinosaurs with paleontology in the bones, and that's really cool. But it all just sort of comes together. It's a really good bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, no, it's really good foreshadowing. It is interesting hearing the Doctor refer to the dinosaurs as a species. That's always if what we were watching that, I kind of went, oh no, they're multiple genuses. They're not a single species, Doctor, and you should know this. You've interacted with them before. But I think something in the first episode also does really well. Is it? I think I may have half mentioned this, but it does a really good job building the tension.
Yes.
Like they use the life readings scanner to really cool effect, like seeing the lights going out,
yeah,
and like the flares of the sensors. That's a really interesting way of implying a lot more violence than you can show.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no. So I was going to say it's interesting that character on the scanner just doesn't appear again after episode 1. It's kind of like, okay, well, we've gone to space. Did anyone tell that guy? Is he just going to be like sitting there like, okay, now all the life signs have disappeared. What do I do?
Look, you could say consequences of traveling with the Doctor, but yeah, no, it's not a bad point to make. It is kind of funny, like because he doesn't show up at all, I think, from when they go into the caves. Like after he has this little bit. Certainly not from when they get on the ship. So that is a bit of a funny detail. Now, having said all of that, I think you're perfectly right to point out that using just the blinking lights as like a symbol for death, the dying of light, I guess, is really effective. And I have to say, it's part of, and I think I mentioned this before in one of the previous episodes, it's one of the reasons why I enjoy classic Doctor Who, because that's kind of innovative in my view. Yes, it's clear that this is a BBC show with a early 80s BBC budget, but they're making it work, and using a little symbolic tool like that is very clever, and it is quite chilling. And then there's a bit where it just cuts to where he's speaking to Snyder, and it just cuts to her name tag, and it looks like her body's been vaporized.
Yeah,
and you're like, that's actually kind of icky. Ugh.
It's horrific. Like seeing the end result of the androids. It was actually like genuinely kind of like disturbing and disgusting. Especially for the most part, the whole episode is like not showing you what happens, and then you see it, and you're like, Jesus.
And it does work, and I think it even happens again when the androids, ambush them, and it's really quite effective because you could argue it might have just been easier to just get the actors to lie down and look like they were dead, but this is a lot more chilling because you don't actually see the vaporization happen. It's literally just android holds out the hand, blast effect, and then cut to the smoldering body, and I'm like, that's really creepy.
Yeah, and it's a good use of the, well, this is obviously going to be too violent to show, but we're forcing you to imagine it happening, and that,
which is
honestly
so much better.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But this is all leading up to the reveal of the Cybermen. It's a really effective first part cliffhanger. I'm not sure how long it had been since they previously appeared in the show.
It was about, I think, I want to say 5 years, because the last one was Revenge of the Cybermen with Tom Baker, and I want to say that was in 1977.
Okay.
In any case, yeah, it would have been a while. And I have to say, I'm glad you've brought this up, because I think that cliffhanger is one of the best cliffhangers, maybe in the entire show, certainly in the classic series for me. It's so... it's just so shocking, and even when I first saw it as a kid, because I knew the Cybermen were in it, because the Cyberman is on the cover of the DVD.
Yes.
Even then, it's so melodramatic, and just, you get that great synth sting, and then just the Cybermen, destroy them at once, and it's, like, this is as a Who fan, this is what I pay for, man. Like,
Yeah, and like,
it's so great.
yeah, because the Cybermen are probably my favorite recurring Doctor Who antagonists.
Huh.
I really enjoy like the because the psychological element of
Mm.
they used to be us, removing the emotion, the body horror of it all.
Mm.
It ticks so many like gut like reaction boxes within me
Yep.
where it's like it's creepy, it's like uh emotionally frightening as well. I think it goes back to the how I think it speaks to how effective the first Cyberman story of the revived era is, where
Yep.
it really
I agree.
shows you what they are and where they came from.
Mhm.
It's that kind of thing, and I always enjoy when they appear because, well, I say that a lot of Cyberman stories don't quite get them right, at least from the revived era. They often play second fiddle to some larger
Mm.
force or threat. They're rarely allowed to stand on their own in the revived series. So it's nice seeing them as the main force in this story. That being said, it is a little weird that like, and again, this might just be my revived era brain speaking, but like seeing a Cyberman story where they don't convert anyone, it's kind of like, well, it's great that they're here, but like they could have been any villain realistically. It's not until episode 4 when we get the philosophical discussion between the cyber leader and the Doctor about emotion and the nature of humanity.
Yeah.
It's not until then where it's like, okay, no, like for this conversation alone, I'm glad it's the Cybermen. But like seeing like when the Cybermen are going up against the army on the spaceship, and it's like they're just shooting people down, and they're not trying to capture people to convert them or anything like that. To me, that was kind of like, again, you could have just used any villain here. How did you feel they were handled in this story?
The point you make about them being sort of, any villain could have come in. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with it, but I understand why you would say it, because the cyber leader says, the strength and might of the cyber race will be confirmed, and that's kind of the whole point of that Cybermen mission. And you could argue, maybe even the Daleks could have done something similar, although they probably would have tried to exterminate the populace again. But I understand why you would say, you could kind of swap them out. But I still really love the way they're used in this episode, and the way, again, everything just comes together in that last episode is quite effective. So, for example, in terms of, why Cybermen are not other villains, it's only Cybermen that we know, and this was established actually in Revenge of the Cybermen, that they're allergic to gold, and so that means that, the Doctor has to use Adric's badge to kill the Cybermen, but that also works because it helps with character, it helps with character development even, and really, again, just kind of hits home the tragedy of those last few minutes. So for me, it does come together. Your point as to why Cybermen are not another villain is well made, and I think on reflection, now that I think about it, it is a little weird, certainly if you're mainly a Revival Who viewer, that they don't convert anyone in this episode. I actually don't think, I think a lot of the time in the classic series, they don't try to convert the main characters.
Well, this is what I've heard about the Cybermen and how they've been treated across eras. I've heard, and you could be able to confirm this more than me, but like a lot of time in the classic era, the Cybermen's main goal was survival, and not necessarily to overthrow populaces and make everyone like them. And you can see that in this episode where it's like their goal is to disrupt a peace summit that would ultimately have resulted in them banding together to destroy the Cybermen. It's all about preservation. Have you heard this point before?
Yes.
Or is this
no, I think it's a fair point. They even mention in the weird little bit where you've got all the flashbacks to the other Cybermen episodes where they show the bit with the Fourth Doctor with Revenge of the Cybermen. They literally say what the goal of that episode was for them, which was they were trying to destroy a planet called Voga, which was a planet that had a massive amount of gold on it, and they were trying to destroy it because they know that gold is their weakness. It suffocates them, so they had to destroy that major source
Right.
to survive, as you say. Which makes sense, given that, the Cybermen are all about kind of preservation and lasting and living as long as they can. But I do understand how you say that it is strange that the conversion element is played down a bit in, actually, I think played down quite a lot in the classic series, and it is a bit hard because a couple of Cybermen stories from the Second Doctor era are missing now, which really sucks. But,
Yeah.
I mean, even something like Tomb of the Cybermen, which is a great Cyberman episode, they're trying to basically just reawaken and sort of, I suppose, go on new missions and just reawaken the whole Cyberman population that's on the planet. But the Doctor stops them and as they say in this episode, confines them to their ice tomb on Telos. So, it's the conversion element. It's definitely played up in the revival series, which I actually think works to its benefit for a number of reasons. And
Yeah, well, it's the unique thing about them. It's what separates, until we get the stupid Dalek humans in Asylum of the Daleks. It's the only thing that really draws a distinction between them and the Daleks in many ways.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just remembered something. There is a bit of conversion stuff that's implied that they're going to do in Tomb of the Cybermen, because I'm pretty sure it's the cliffhanger to episode 1 of that story where the cyber controller gets reawakened and he says in this really creepy 60s electronic robot voice, "You belong to us, you will be like us." So it's there, but as you say, it's not as played up as it is in the revival.
Sure.
And as much as I love the Cybermen episodes of the classic series, this one in particular, you're not wrong to point out, well, why wouldn't they want to play that element up? Because that is what makes them quite a unique villain, in terms of their motivations, what they are and what they do. There's a lot of difference, I think you would agree, in terms of presentation and style between Cybermen and Daleks, but in terms of motivation, the conversion element, I think, is probably the big thing, the big selling point for Cybermen.
Yeah, I do get what you mean, how, like I said, like, in episode 4 especially, you can really tell why they chose the Cybermen for this story.
Yeah.
Well, not only do you get that amazing moment between the Cyber Leader and the Doctor, discussing emotion and its strengths and weaknesses and that, but it does tie into the final conflict and the final resolution, and it's something that I think works to the story's benefit. And we'll move on to this subject now. It's Adric's death, and the way that it plays out. It is. I do think it's very deliberate that, like, it's logic puzzles that will stop the autopilot or whatever it is. That is kind of a contrivance where it's like, why wouldn't you just not have a way to turn it off? But it works for the emotional beats of this because it plays into Adric's fatal flaw.
Yeah.
Which is
to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, he's got to solve the puzzle. And it's the kind of thing that I love in characters in general, where their strength is also their flaw.
Yeah. And
to veer off topic from Doctor Who very briefly, it's why I like Captain America as a character so much. In Winter Soldier, his devotion and his loyalty is played as his strength, but then in Civil War they make that his weakness. And it's why that trilogy works so well. And it's the same with Adric here. Like, the fact that he just can't help but try to solve the puzzle, even when they're on their way to the escape pod, the doors are closing, and he's immediately like, "Oh, hang on, that's the answer," and he ducks out. Like, he could have just gone. He could have just had a guaranteed escape, but instead he's like, "I can solve this." To be fair, he didn't know at that point that the Earth was safe, and he was also trying to do the right thing.
Well, that's the great part of it. There's so many wonderful little hairpin twists and turns, even in the last half of the last episode. The fact
Yeah.
that and the way they set up, and the cyber leader says to the doctor, and you do not consider friendship a weakness. And, he says, no, I do not. And so that theme of friendship kind of rears its head again. And you think, oh, well, will they all make it out in time? And you think, oh, they're just about to, and Adric's about to leave, but no, he's a bit of a moron, and he goes in to save the thing, and then it turns out he didn't need to do any of that anyway, and it's just... It really is quite emotionally devastating.
It's tragic. It's like a tragic piece of irony where
It is. Oh, it's
Adric is
so
the only one. Adric is the only one that doesn't know that it's a pointless endeavor, and in fact,
Yeah.
if he does succeed, he alters the course of history.
Yeah.
Bizarrely.
And it's so rough.
Yeah, and even the fact that his final words are "Now I'll never know if I was right."
Yeah.
Like
great.
that's what's weighing on. But that's what's weighing on his mind. Not oh no, Earth is doomed.
But even then, it's funny. You could argue that that is part of Adric because he's quite young. He's a bit of an uppity. I mean, he's really smart, but he tends to be a bit uppity when he's around other people, and there's a bit of arrogance there. But there's also a real tragedy to that line because it's like he feels like this is the only way he can be, of value by solving puzzles and being sort of being able to intellectually spar with the Doctor. And the fact that that's the last thing on his mind, it is really sad. And the fact that he's holding, that's actually another detail which you would only know, I think, if you'd watched a previous episode. When the ship is about to hit the Earth, there are a couple of close-ups of Adric's face, and he's holding like a little ring of, it's like some sort of plant material. Now, it's been ages since I've seen this episode, but I think, that comes from the episode Full Circle, where Adric is introduced, and his older brother, who he looks up to, they're part of like, I think like almost like a tribe sort of a thing, like a brotherhood, and he gives Adric this, little string of rope as a sign that he's sort of matured, almost like I think it's almost like a manhood sort of thing. So to him, that's what's really important. That's holding on to that makes him feel like he belongs, and it's quite poignant. Having said that, though, yes, that's definitely something you would need to know beforehand.
Well, I do also like going into the replay value of this episode real quick. It is interesting how on a rewatch, like it's so obvious that he's going to die at the end of the story. Like they do a lot of work, like planting the seeds throughout, like making Adric and specifically his relationship with the Doctor a big focus. It's definitely not a coincidence that for the first half of the story, he's in the TARDIS by himself, and it's the Doctor and Tegan and Nyssa who are doing the exploring. But then when you get to the second half, he goes with Adric just alone.
Yeah,
it's just the two of them.
Yeah,
I think it's a really nice way of showing that the Doctor is starting to like really treat Adric like the others.
Yeah.
It plays into like even if the Doctor was already doing that beforehand, I have no evidence of that, but like it shows that he's listening to Adric and his concerns, and he's like, okay, like you get some time now, even if he doesn't actually say that in the episode. Like he takes Adric specifically.
Yeah.
He trusts Adric to crack the logic puzzles. He's impressed by the calculations Adric's been doing to get home. And Adric is the one that saves the day realistically with the gold badge. Like the fact that the Doctor uses that it definitely plays into that whole thing.
Yeah. And the relationship I think is quite carefully navigated, particularly in that first half, which is obviously so important for the second half of the story. And I really love those little exchanges in the first episode. Even when Adric just comes right out and says, "I'm tired of being an outsider, Doctor," and that kind of dialogue in other contexts that would worry me because it seems like a bit of on the nose dialogue. He's literally saying, "Oh, this is how I feel," but it really works. They build up to it quite well, and it's not, they don't overdo it, and it just fits so well into that part of the episode. You really feel it. Incidentally, that bit where they're quarreling over, how the hell is the Doctor supposed to get back into E-space, it has one of my favorite Fifth Doctor lines, and actually maybe one of my favorite Classic Who lines in general, where the Doctor says, "E-space is another universe. There isn't a taxi service that goes back and forth." Which
there are a lot of really good lines in this story in general. Like I know you're going to mention this one calls himself the Doctor and he does nothing but interfere.
Yeah.
But I when I was watching it, my attention was drawn to when the Doctor's trying to fix the bomb. He says something like when the timer starts going up again, and I'm just like, what do we do now? That's another thing. How like Adric is right there with the Doctor helping to dismantle the bomb. That's another thing.
Yeah.
But like the Doctor says something like abandoned methodical procedure for blind instinct. And like, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's the Doctor. That's exactly what they do.
Yeah. And it's those little bits of dialogue that show that there was more care, I think, put into this episode than even a lot of other classic episodes.
Yeah, I think Eric Saward, or Saward, or however you pronounce it.
Sayward, I think is how you pronounce it.
Sayward. Okay, Eric Sayward did a great job writing this one.
Yeah, he did.
He really knows the characters. Are you kidding me? Was this the only one he directed an audio adventure? That's what I'm looking at.
Eric Sayward wrote it, and he also, I think he
wrote a few. He's got I've got his credits here.
Oh yeah.
He wrote the Visitation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He wrote Resurrection of the Daleks.
Yep.
And he wrote Revelation of the Daleks as well.
Did he do Attack of the Cybermen, or maybe he was just a script editor?
No, he doesn't. Attack of the Cybermen is listed here. That's not a TV story, is it?
No, it is.
It's
Sixth Doctor story. He might have been the script editor for it.
Maybe.
Because I remember seeing I think it was an interview with him on the special features of Attack of the Cybermen, and he said that there was a problem with too many talking heads with that episode, because you had the Cyber Leader and the Cyber Controller and the Cyber Lieutenant, and just... Anyway. But yes, his writing is very, very good generally, and even in Resurrection of the Daleks, because I hope you don't mind me spoiling it, but...
I've seen it.
Oh yes, you have to. Yeah, when Tegan leaves, even that ending is quite emotionally powerful.
So he wrote two Fifth Doctor companion departure episodes.
Yeah, and they're both quite good. I mean, Resurrection of the Daleks, you could argue, has some flaws to it, but it's still pretty good. And those endings in particular really have a lot of emotional heft to them, which is really good.
Well, also, in terms of the writing, like this episode doesn't really have a problem that a lot of other classic serials have, where it's like the cliffhangers are kind of pointless, and just there to be cliffhangers. I'm fairly certain that every cliffhanger in this episode like has a reason to be there.
Yeah,
and like it affects the next episode. Like the first episode's cliffhanger is the
Cybermen.
Cybermen. Okay, so now we know that the Cybermen are going to be in the story. The second episode, I believe, it ends with the cliffhanger of the Doctor and Adric being discovered by the traitorous
on this
shipmate.
Ship we execute murderers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then the third episode's cliffhanger of
My Army Awaits Doctor.
Yes, and how they play a key factor in episode 4. I did hear you about to like jump to the defense of the classic series cliffhangers, but like the one that always springs to mind for me is the final cliffhanger in Genesis of the Daleks, where it's like the Doctor comes out of the room with like the baby Dalek on his head and it's attacking him, and then it's like, okay, we got off his head and he's fine, and now we can get back to the story. Like that is a cliffhanger to be there because the episode is ending, and we need to we need to.
It's a fair
end
criticism.
the episode.
And
that doesn't make sense to me, because like you could have easily had that cliffhanger be the Doctor's got the wires and it's like go on then, do it, Doctor, and it's like him like looking conflicted about it. That could have been a great cliffhanger.
I'm not sure whether it like how integral that would have been to the structure of the whole thing. Because I think that bit of the final moral conflict, I think that comes a fair bit of a way into the episode that it's in, so it would have been difficult to put it at the front. But
from my memory, it was like almost immediately. But we may have to revisit this when we talk about Genesis, whenever that happens.
But yes, you're not wrong to say that BBC show, 60s, 70s, 80s, had certain episodes, had to structure them a certain way, and there's obviously flaws to it, and I don't want to admit that. It's frustrating to admit that, but yes, I understand why you'd raise those concerns. It's like
it's something that Revived Who has from time to time as well. Like it'll have a cliffhanger that is resolved basically instantly,
and it's very sort of I don't know what you'd call it, like cliffhanger bait, I guess. It's like, here's this really scary thing, and then, oh no, it just gets resolved immediately. Or it's actually, I'll give you a great example of it. And this is an interesting sort of little anecdote, if I may, with my experience with classic Doctor Who. When I was a kid, as I said in the opening podcast episode, I would watch Doctor Who religiously, and it would be an every night sort of a thing when it played during the week. And there was one episode I watched it was the Third Doctor story, but I'd missed the opening credits, so I didn't know what the name of the episode of the story was.
Right.
And it got to right at the end of the episode, and it's, Doctor and Sarah Jane arrive on some planet that's clearly set in the quarry that they always film the alien planets on. I thought, okay, great classic adventure. And then they're at some sort of like a base or something, and a door opens, and then immediately the Daleks come out and start firing their weapons. Like, holy heck, that's so great. Oh man, that's so exciting. But what I did not know was that episode, that the story was called Death to the Daleks, and literally the next episode, it cuts to the same bit. They're coming out, they're firing their weapons, but nothing's happening, because their weapons have malfunctioned, and that's the major conceit of the episode. And the Daleks, there's like some native species that lives on this planet, and they basically destroy the Daleks. I think they throw one off a cliff, and the Daleks have to find new weapons. And I want to say that this was real. I want to say I didn't just imagine this, but I swear to God, there was a bit where the Daleks are developing new weapons, and it's like a gun basically, and they're doing target practice with a tiny little TARDIS on a metal plate, and it's and I think even at the time I thought,
can we do Death to the Daleks next?
That's a little different. Didn't expect that. Not sure how much I believe it, but again, it's just one of those things where, and it might be just nostalgia goggles, but I watched it, I'm like, yeah, I love that so much. It's such a dumb thing to do. It's so funny, and oh my god, it was great.
I'm conflicted about that sort of thing, because I obviously like hate it when an episode's villain is spoiled by the title, but they still treat it like it's a big reveal.
Yeah. But
there is something that is very satisfying about an episode being called, like, for example, Blank of the Daleks. Like, yeah. I really like that consistent naming scheme, which is what makes me really like, oh, but it's always so great when the Daleks are revealed as a villain halfway through and you didn't know they were coming.
Yeah.
But, like, the conventional naming scheme is so good, though.
It must be said, in terms of that, Blank of the Daleks, the name Death to the Daleks, actually, that feeds into the plot of the story better than most of the other names, because even something like Resurrection, I mean, it works, but it's not... I wonder if it is as cohesive with the content of the episode as Death to the Daleks, because, again, Death to the Daleks, that's what it is. It's you're seeing the Daleks getting, for a good chunk of the story, just sort of totaled by, sort of the Doctor and his companions, which is good fun. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
I did mention beforehand how I do like it when there are multiple companions, but this episode does have like a focus on something that is a problem with that, where it's like, we're 45 minutes into the recording, basically.
Yeah.
and we've mentioned Nissa and Tegan by name twice, including the sentence that I'm currently speaking.
And the one where I talk about her in another episode.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there is not a lot for Nissa and Tegan to do in this story. Tegan kills a Cyberman, but that role could have been filled by literally any of the soldiers.
Yep.
And the bit where the Cyber Leader threatens Tegan with death to show the Doctor's weakness could have been Adric. He was already there.
Yeah.
Like, there's not an awful lot for them to do in this story beyond, like, telling Lieutenant Scott, no, don't go outside. I've told you this 5 times already. The Doctor will handle it.
Yeah. Yeah, which, you know, it is a bit of a shame because they're both good characters, and
well, Tegan's Australian, so she's automatically my favorite classic series companion.
By the way, something sad about that. It took me years. I don't think it was until 2008 that I figured out that Tegan was Australian.
Really?
I have no idea how that happened. I do not know why her accent didn't register with me, but it was not until I think it was actually a documentary I'd watched on the Time Flight special features where it was a spotlight on Tegan, and they mentioned, yeah, she's Australian. I'm like, oh, okay. That's that's just a small little tidbit there, but it's just funny that it took me that long. But yes, you're right in saying that there isn't a lot for Tegan and Nissa to do. I mean, you could argue when they start crying when they find out Adric's death, it does sort of help.
No, that is a really nice moment. Yeah, that is a really nice moment.
But you could argue as well on principle. It's literally like they're there, they do some stuff, and they're sad at the end. That's like kind of their whole sort of impact in the story, which is again a shame because they're good characters, and I think
but I'm not mad about it because this is an Adric focus episode.
Yeah, I agree.
It kind of really needs to be all about him, and sidelining them is kind of important because otherwise
you wouldn't get enough space.
Well, yeah, it also just proves Adric right. Where it's like this is his focus spotlight episode, but they're still important to the story in more ways than he is.
Yeah. Or in different ways, at least. I'd agree with that. And I think, again, it's a shame, but because it's such an Adric-centric episode, and his character arc is so important, you kind of have to make room for the other characters. A room for him at the expense of other characters, excuse me.
Yeah.
So, again, a shame, but it's understandable why they do that. And I think with a thing like classic Doctor Who especially, you know, there's always going to be room for more character development. And, as I said, Tegan, indeed, does get a great farewell in Resurrection of the Daleks. It really is quite powerful.
Well, it sort of plays into something else that is, like, odd about this episode. Maybe it's just from a revived series perspective. But, like, obviously, this episode couldn't have ended any other way. It almost had to be resolution and then boom, Adric's death, and we ended there. But as a result, the side characters don't really get an ending. Like, because I'm used to the Revive series thing where it's like, okay, we've resolved the conflict, now we're going to drop off the side characters and be like, okay, goodbye, Doctor, thanks for helping us out, I'm going to do better in the future, or we're going to make sure that this corporation learns the error of their ways, or something like that. But, like, we don't really get that in this story, where it's like they disappear on the escape pod, and then, like I said, that we had that one side character who was watching the scanner who just vanishes from the story and doesn't appear again. Even the paleontologist, I forget her name, but they put a big focus on her on episode 1, where it's like, oh no, she's the catalyst for this story kicking off. Her entire team were killed by the androids. She's saved to lead the soldiers through. She comes aboard the TARDIS, does nothing for 3 episodes, and is then just shot by a Cyberman and dies without, like, any fanfare or, like, anything like that. So I was like, well, why'd you leave her alive in that case? Why didn't you just kill her in the cave? Like, there's no reason for her to be there. The only reason that she's there is so that when we cut back to the TARDIS while Lieutenant Scott and the soldiers are out in the field, Nissa has something to do and someone to talk to. Like,
I wonder whether it's a case like with the deaths by the androids, whether it's just a restriction of what it was like, you know, making a BBC show in the 80s, because I think even though Doctor Who can get to some pretty dark and serious areas, I think especially that you had things like the script editor who would go through, I think, I can't remember the name of the script editor, which is annoying because he was a really big one, but there was one script editor during the John Pertwee era who would go through and get rid of the nastier, more unpleasant details. I'm gonna kick myself for not remembering his name, but there was one bit when he was editing the script for what is it? The Time Warrior, excuse me, the first Sontaran episode, and there's a bit where the sort of this medieval villain character says, his wife will crunch on his eyeballs in her soup ere nightfall, and the script editor just said, yeah, and I just put a pencil right through that. So
Jesus.
I wonder whether this is a case of, oh, well, we can't show too much death. That's going to be a bit too depressing. So they're just like, oh, well, we'll just put the characters over here, and they can just stand there and do something, even if it's not a major part of the episode. So I wonder if that's not a big issue as to why these sort of character arcs aren't as satisfying with the minor characters. I mean,
Maybe, but it's a shame because like I said, I really did enjoy many of these side characters. Lieutenant Scott was a really interesting character by the end of it. Like I said,
yeah,
like I always
he was
enjoyed
pretty
it.
good for a small
Yeah,
character. He's got that kind of nice, gruff sort of sense of duty, sort of a feeling, which is always great because it comes into conflict with the Doctor's values, and
yeah,
it's
and
a really good
it is
dynamics.
refreshing, and it is refreshing, especially in Doctor Who, to see a military leader who's actually able to hold their own against the villains. Because we see it so often where it's like, the military leader's like, "That's it, we're going to lead the charge," and the Doctor's like, "No, I'm telling you, like you won't be, you don't stand a chance against them. Your weapons are too primitive," and they say, "Well, I think I know how to handle myself out there, Doctor," and then they instantly die.
Yeah, I have
It's so like refreshing to see one of those characters like make it through to the end.
yeah I have to say I do like her name's Briggs, isn't it? The
I
captain
think Briggs,
of the
yeah,
ship.
Briggs is
Yeah.
the captain.
I really like her as a character. She's very I don't know, the fact that she just gives everybody sort of shade and attitude it's very satisfying to see as a character. She's very entertaining in that sense. She's kind of a highlight because she arrives a little bit later on in the story, but she's really just again just entertaining to watch. And I like the conflict she has with her other. I'm forgetting her name here. The woman with the lighter hair. When she says, then believe your own
Berger.
instruments, Captain.
It's
It's
Berger,
just
right?
yes, yes, I believe so. The conflicts with Verger, it's very there's a lot of dramatic tension there, and it's part of the reason why I like Classic Who, because it is, with the acting and the dialogue, it is a bit melodramatic, but it really works, and it's just so damn entertaining to see those little interactions.
See,
Now,
I was distracted for a lot of those scenes because whenever they referred to her by name, like Berger, I was just reminded of Berger's catchphrase, and like that was on my mind for a lot of it, and I was just like that's not what I want to be thinking about right now. I need to be focused on the Cybermen trying to break through this door,
yeah.
and one of them getting stuck halfway through, which is a genuinely really cool effect.
Oh, that was great. And again, I mean, I know it's very easy to mock the special effects of Classic Who, but that was a really good moment, and it was integrated into the plot really well too. How it was, a result of the antimatter, manipulating the molecules around it or the particles around it, and it just works.
Yeah, it's a really good example of like using the limitations to your strength.
Yeah, and getting the Doctor, doing what the Doctor does best, solving these problems, using their great scientific brain to just sort of sort things out, which is just it's great. It's the classic sort of stuff, and it's also really quite integral to the plot, even though minutes later they just blow it up with a bomb, and the Doctor literally says, "I should have realized it," but it still works. The dramatic tension is really there, and it's quite present and palpable, which is really great to see. One thing I do want to say though about the character arcs, you are right to point out that they don't really get any kind of ending. The minor characters, there's not even a, oh well, yeah, our best friend has died, but we're gonna let you go now. You can go back to Earth. And however, I actually think that works to its benefit because it really just sells the devastation of Adric's death, because I think I've heard that he wasn't a very popular companion. People didn't like him, but even if you didn't like him, I'd be willing to bet if you saw that ending, that would be really pretty shocking. It would probably make you feel kind of as guilty as the Doctor, I'm sure, feels at that point. It's like, oh, yeah, I may not have liked this character that much, but damn, that's really full on. That's quite the emotional gut punch. I don't know how I feel about that.
It definitely is a case of like I said, like the episode ending on any other note would have been wrong. Like they almost had to.
It could have
wrap it up
theoretically
very
worked.
quickly.
It could have theoretically worked if it was a thing where Adric sort of proves himself, but they would still have had to work on his characterization if he survived after that point. So having it end that way was probably the best way they could have ended it, and the specific way, like how the very ending of it ended, definitely was how it should have ended, because you couldn't have really had a bit where it's like, oh, goodbye, other minor characters. And it also helps to serve even the theme of the episode and the show in general, which is, this is the consequences, this is the risks that people take when they travel with the Doctor, and you know what? Maybe that's not always a good thing. Maybe the Doctor can't really live with that, because there's that great bit where it's just, when Tegan and Issa's like, Adric, Doctor, and then it just cuts to his face, and you can see the raw devastation with the great little synth notes coming through, and it's like, wow, that's really, like it really kicks you in the guts. And I was actually, when I watched it, I then watched the whole credits all the way through. I didn't stop the episode once it was there, because I wanted to really feel the emotional impact, and it was there. It was really...
Yeah. I mean, it was there from the start, right? I mean, like, it's like I said, like, from the beginning, on a rewatch, it's obvious that it's leading to that point, but you still get that, like, the Doctor doesn't say anything after it happens. Like, for the rest of the episode, he's stunned. The credits not being normal, it is a real shock. And maybe that's why it's called Earthshock. It was there the whole time.
Yeah.
And with that seems like the most logical way to wrap up this discussion with a goddamn awful pun.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, great episode. Again, was it as perfect as my nostalgia brain remembers it being? Maybe not, but still a really solid episode. With some great...
It's interesting. It's interesting that we've gone opposite ways, where you've gone, maybe it's not quite as good as I remember it, and I've gone, it's better than I remember it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't doubt that there may be many moments with this podcast where we'll come to those similar conclusions. But yes, either way.
By the end of this series, we'll have flip-flopped, and I'll be a classic series fan, and you'll be a revived series fan.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure about that, but...
Alright,
anyway,
yes.
yeah.
Great episode, and great episode of the podcast, too. We did a great job, if I don't say so myself.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I think we navigated all the weird tangents and anecdotal bits pretty well, which is quite astonishing, because I go off on those tangents all the time. Because that's just how my brain works.
And we love you for it. This has been Two Who's Review. My name's Alex.
Oh, sorry, did we want to score this episode?
Oh, god damn, yeah. I forgot that we do that. We did. Timescale did it for us at the start. I was like, uh-oh. There's something we gotta do. You go first.
No, when we don't do 0.5s, do we? It's just the numbers, isn't it? It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, not 10s and 8s and a half, or 9s and a half.
I think that adding decimals is a cowardly way out.
Fair enough. Okay, in that case, yeah, I'm still gonna go with a 9 on this one for me. Again, it's maybe not the 10 that I used to think it was, but it just, man, by the time you get to the end, you're like, even if there were some flaws in it, you just forget all those flaws, because my god, it just really gets to you. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a 9 on this one.
I'm also gonna go 9. I think we're in total agreement about this. It's definitely one of those classic era episodes that I think is pretty universally loved.
Yeah, and for good reason.
And for absolutely good reason. Its pacing is great. We didn't mention it, but like I love how like I sort of hinted at this on my first watch. I was like, the first episode is very slow, and you get to the action, but then like it's very incremental. Like the pace
Absolutely.
picks up across all 4 episodes, and it just does not let up.
Yeah.
Like it keeps on building throughout, just like the tension does, and like it's almost like it starts off with the Doctor and Adric's discussion, and it's like this is the normal relationship, and like they're at odds, and as the pace ramps up, you get closer and closer to Adric's demise, and like the stakes and the action and the tension and all ramps up until that moment when the freighter hits the Earth, and it's like boom, that's it, we're done. Get to the credits. You just saw that. We're gonna leave you mourning this character you may not have even liked, and you're gonna rave about us in decades from now when you're doing a podcast about it.
And I actually, the one last thing I would like to mention is in terms of the structure, and I think I probably mentioned this in a previous podcast episode as well, but there's like I think a joke with Doctor Who fans, a classic who it's like, oh well, it's really only the first episode, the last episode that's really important, especially for the longer stories like the 6, 7, 8, 10 parters. But I don't think that's true with this episode. I think every episode is as important as the last, and really, I think really every moment of every episode is as important as the last. Because even when there are moments when something like the Doctor does something and it seems to be a waste, like when he's trying to, when he gets the Cyberman stuck in the door with the antimatter thing, but then they just blow it up with a bomb, it still really hits you emotionally. It all comes together and it all works. So I think structurally, this is a really solid episode. And, as I've often said before, as much as I love the classic series, there are some flaws with it. And even though I don't totally agree that it's, the first and the last episode are the most important, I understand why people say that, but that's not true with this episode. It's solid, the structure really works, and all the emotional heft is there. So yeah, it's ultimately a really great episode for me.
Awesome. Let's actually sign off now that we haven't forgotten anything important about the way we've decided to do this show.
Alright.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And next time we're diving back into the Revive series with The End of the World.
Ooh.